afternoon. My name is Esperanza Winger. I am the Technical Service Manager for HP Hood. As the Cornell Institute for Food Systems Industry Partner, I am pleased to introduce the next two speakers as they share their thoughts on sustainability, climate change, and the food supply in this session of building smart systems that address the big issues. Much remains uncertain about what the future of our planet will look like, but there are at least two things that we know for sure. We will have to eat, and we will have to find a sustainable way to do it. Among other positions, Mike Hoffman has directed Cornell Agriculture Experimental Station and the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program in the past, and is now focusing his efforts in finding sustainable food solutions as executive director of the Cornell Institute for Climate Change and Agriculture. Today, Mike will speak with us about the impact of climate change in our interconnected and interdependent food system. Please welcome Mike Hoffman.
I think I'm all set.
Yeah.
Good. Except for this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect timing. People have you all been tasting wine, and now you're going to taste wine in about an hour and a half. And we're going to talk about something upbeat, climate change, for a while, and food waste. First, I want to start with the couple Neil mentioned earlier, and Craig mentioned they came from small farms. This is one of those times when I can actually eat them. We had one cow on our farm in Wisconsin. And I milked that poor cow every morning, every night, I think through grade school and high school. But that was the milk we had in our house. What I want to do, and this may be some sort of basic for some, is just cover the basics of climate change rather quickly, the impact it's having on agriculture and our food system, and put up a few challenges for this industry as we look forward. That orange band is the troposphere. It's 5 miles thick at the poles, 10 miles at the equator, so right here, 7 miles high. That's the space we live in. That's where all the action occurs, the weather and climate. That's it. Solar radiation comes in, hits the Earth, bounces off its IR, hits greenhouse gases, which are essential to life on this planet and agriculture. Some of that is reflected back. So the blanket is has been just the right density for thousands of years. But now we're putting more and more greenhouse gases into that thin little blanket, and it's getting warmer. Not that different than putting a sweater on in the wintertime. Nothing new about this carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. This guy, Tyndall, he was a really good quarterback in high school. He was a really good quarterback in high school in the 1800s when I was in high school. Nothing new about the science of greenhouse gases. That's been well researched and demonstrated for a long time. Into the 1800s, we had 270 parts per million of CO2, which is a good thing, just the right balance for us to grow food, to expand. 2014, we hit 400 parts per million. That's 40% above what it ought to be. And if we keep going, we could very well hit 900 parts per million by the end of the century. The graph on the bottom is from year 1000 to 2000. Going to 900 parts per million would be not a very good thing. We would have 60 days above 95 here in the Northeast if we reach that point. One thing that farmers are often struck by is this C12. Carbon comes in 3 different forms, 13, 14, 13, and 12. 12 is the lighter form. Think carbon and carbon dioxide. That's what plants prefer to absorb. So millions of years ago, when plants were absorbing CO2 and then locked in, and now that's coal, gas, and oil that we burn, CO2 is emitted. Carbon-12 is increasing in the atmosphere, not the other forms of carbon. It's like those are stamped. And you've heard 97 out of 100 scientists, experts agree climate change is happening, and we are the cause. Some facts. We've gained 1.5 degrees Since the Industrial Revolution, it's warming twice as fast at the poles. 2001, 2010, the hottest decade. 2014, the hottest year. 2015, we'll break that record. Hotter summer, warmer winters, the rate of warming is actually very fast. And the evidence is all around us. You might want to head out, if you haven't seen Glacier National Park in Montana and British Columbia, because the glaciers will be gone in about a decade. I'm not sure what they're going to call the park after that, but they won't have any glaciers. When it comes to agriculture, think of glacier meltwaters are critical to agriculture in many areas of the world. It's also critical to hydroelectric power. Bolivia gets almost 60% of its water from hydroelectric, dependent on melting glaciers. In the Arctic sea ice is about 700,000 square miles smaller than it should be at this time of the year. That's a lot of blue ocean absorbing heat, as opposed to that energy being reflected back up, sunlight being reflected back up. It's being absorbed by the blue ocean, which warms, melts more ice, opens up more of the sea ice. Oceans are rising. 8 inches today doesn't sound like a whole lot. Pretty much about a third of that is simply thermal expansion. Warm water expands. A lot more is coming from the melting glaciers, which are pouring into the ocean. But something more ominous is acidification. 3 years ago, the oyster industry, the oyster nursery industry in the Pacific Northwest was failing. They couldn't quite understand why. Well, they learned the pH in the big tanks where they put seawater was too high. They could correct for that. But think of the whole food chain. At the very basis of the food chain, anything that needs a shell is starting to be compromised because, in fact, the ocean is 30% more acidic than it used to be. Food production is moving north because of warmer winters. In Manitoba, they've increased grain production substantially over the last 7 or 8 years. They're growing about 1 million acres of grain, where in the past it was just 20,000 acres. More downpours, warmer atmosphere, more moisture, more severe weather. In the Northeast, we are up 71% in heavy precipitation events. This is the 1% across the top of the really extreme weather events. A couple of years ago, Islip, Long Island had 18.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. Closer to home, Penyan had 5 inches in 4 hours. That's a lot of water coming down really fast. This is probably one of the more important stories I'm going to tell, and that is precipitation changes looking forward. Obviously, this is out 2080, but somehow we've got to get from there today to that point. But if you look, especially to the southwest, winter, we get a lot of winter vegetables from Mexico. It's going to get much drier. Spring also much drier. Fall, more or less the same. Summer also drier. But look at California. It's going to get hit with the projections for the Southwest are drier and drier conditions. But in contrast, look at the northern states and southern Canada. I suggest we have opportunities here simply because we will have water. Toby Alt, one of our new faculty members, published along with others a recent paper on megadroughts. There's a 50 to 80% of a megadrought. That's a 30-year drought hitting the Southwest before the end of the century. It's going to get drier. So, in general, more extreme weather, floods and droughts, high temperature stress, new pests coming in. I'm an entomologist, so this is good news, job security. But let's just look at the Northeast. Adequate water, longer and warmer growing seasons, reductions elsewhere in productivity. Do we have the potential to expand and diversify? We also have 22% of the U.S. population. Got great cities to feed. Is this an opportunity for job creation, economic growth? I think if we approach this strategically, it is. So now, let's go out to dinner. I'm just going to use, now this is Dutch, because this is a fairly expensive meal. But let's just look at the menu at a restaurant, a rather nice restaurant. But consider growing food is no longer business as usual. Supply chains are changing because of all of these increases in volatility, prices, and supply worldwide. There's more risk. So, let's start with the good stuff. Tequila. Agave production in northern Mexico is in serious trouble because of the drought. Cork trees have changed dramatically in the Mediterranean. They're much more dense. You're making premium rums, things I don't know about or Don't even drink. I'm kind of a Bud Light guy. It's a really big deal if you're going to be selling something that you want to store for 20, 30 years as a premium product, but the cork, which you depended on for breathability, has changed. Whiskey, the amber color, and other characteristics when they're stored in oak barrels depends on seasonal change. Well, those changes now are changing. Summer's hotter, winters are warmer. The list goes on and on and on. But let's go to ice cubes. I was giving a presentation in Washington to one of our senators' agricultural working groups and was emailed shortly after by someone who was from the American Craft Spirits Association. They make the really good stuff. And she says, "You're telling me things are changing, especially water availability, and we're a company that makes long-term investments, assuming there will be water." I was invited to go to speak at their national meeting. I didn't make it because of a snowstorm. Maybe next year. Let's move on to the salad. Avocado production in California will be off by 40% by 2030 because of increasing temperatures. Lettuce, Salinas Valley, doing great. They've got groundwater. Higher temperatures are going to cause stress on lettuce production, just the quality. It's difficult to grow organic tomatoes in New York because of the heavy early rain and the incidence of a disease called late blight. The bread, the grains, probably stable through the middle of the century, but towards the end of the century, because of extremes, it's going to get more and more challenging to produce the grain we need. Don't forget, adaptation applies throughout. We're not just going to lay on our back. We heard excellent stories earlier on about drip irrigation, grapes, and so on, so we have all these tools we can apply, but despite that, grains will fall off towards the end of the century. Wine is extremely susceptible, some varieties extremely susceptible to changes in temperature. California average temperature last year was 4 degrees above normal, let alone the drought. Lobster, I said this was not a cheap meal. Lobster production has moved 50 miles north off the coast of Maine because of rapidly warming temperatures. They're not quite sure, but it's one of the few places in the ocean where it's actually increasing in temperature 8 times faster than anywhere else. So lobsters have moved north. Shrimp industry is gone. Rice, think of the Mekong Delta. Saltwater intrusion, rising sea levels will have an immense impact on rice production in Vietnam. And now the good stuff. I got the coffee one time and someone yelled out, "Not coffee." What? Coffee production worldwide is changing dramatically. Production in Costa Rica is off by about 30%. Again, changes in precipitation patterns and increasing temperatures. Vanilla, grown on the west coast of Madagascar, production is moving inland because of increasing storms. It just means more transportation cost. Cocoa, Western Africa, they've got huge issues with labor and other things, but also production is suffering because of the same reasons. They can probably move to Central and South America for production. I see kiwis up in the corner there. Chile lost all kiwi production 2 growing seasons ago because of an unexpected cold spell or frost. Also, whenever you think of fruit, think of winter chill. So California is warming both daytime and nighttime, summer and winter temperatures. At some point, they're not going to have enough winter chill for an awful lot of fruit crops and some nut crops. So I think the menu is changing. So I described a situation that many of us, maybe most of us in this room, can enjoy a good meal out. But what if you're low income or poor? You live in sub-Saharan Africa, which is agriculture is rain-fed, and you have few resources to adapt. We're looking at a global food security challenge, a national security challenge. The war in Syria started because of a long-term drought. Meeting the challenge. Having spent a little time in some national positions, I've been able to learn more about some of our other institutions, land grants around the country. But I can say with confidence that at Cornell, we have probably more expertise, especially at the nexus of climate change and agriculture than anywhere else. And it covers the gamut: plant breeding, integrated pest management, soil health, addressing heat stress in dairy cattle, climate modeling, extreme weather, communication, water management, on and on and on, and then reducing our greenhouse gases through development of renewable energy, energy conservation, and nutrient management. And I'm an entomologist, but I actually work with some social scientists, and we surveyed 800 New York State residents, adults, and asked a series of questions. One question was, do you believe in climate change? 82% said yes. So if you look across all the challenges New York State faces, what do you think is the most important? So there was a list, taxes, kids in school, crime, blah, blah, blah. And guess where climate change fell out? At the bottom. And we're trying to understand why. I'm an optimist, so at the bottom, it can only go one direction, up, which is a good thing. But some of the analyses have now teased out that once someone accepts the fact that humans are causing climate change, they are more willing to act. Also, if something has happened in your backyard, so to speak, Sandy, heavy rain, that's another reason that people then will begin to act. So we have lots of expertise here, but partnerships are essential. I think this was said earlier, but not in the context of climate change, but this is an all-hands-on-deck effort. And one of the things that's recently happened in 2013, we created this Cornell Institute for Climate Change and Agriculture to first raise the profile of the challenge we face, to listen to the producers in New York and beyond. What are the issues they're facing? What are the challenges? And how do we respond to their needs? We actually formed what's called a climate smart extension team. We have 6 extension specialists around the state who are paid. Part of their salary is to focus on climate change. So they're right on the ground listening to what's going on. But our goal is to build capacity to grow and strengthen agriculture in the face of a changing climate. Also, within the last year or so, the USDA formed climate change hubs. There are 7 of these around the U.S. We're obviously in the Northeast. But again, their goal is to bring the various parties together, USDA, NRCS, Forest Service, land grants, et cetera, together, kind of an all hands on deck, to help address climate change. And I'm sure anybody who's in the food industry is following the news about climate change being in the press and that the industry should be aware of it. And I sense a lot of the industry is, but maybe not enough. But the first headline, climate change and food security, water scarcity threatens major food companies, but few are tackling the challenge in International Business Times. Climate extremes inflate food prices in the Financial Times. An unstoppable problem is making it increasingly difficult for the world to produce enough food. Business Insider. It's out there, getting attention. I suggest that I'd like to pose a challenge. No, that's the next slide. This one is how to feed the world and stay in business. So with all the changes, there's both a regional but also global climate smart farming or agriculture initiative. And this is what we've heard earlier. What we heard about grapes in California using the best drip irrigation systems. I was quite impressed by that. Precision agriculture, all the tools we have to help our producers stay in business under these changing conditions. There's also risk to the supply chain. One of the things that came out of this dialogue with the spirits group was this particular individual called me and said, I now source 3 locations for my rye rather than depending on one. I don't know if anybody heard the latest on pumpkins and Libby facilities out of Illinois. This was interesting. They grow all their pumpkins within 90 miles of their facility. They lost half of their crop this year because of heavy rains early on. So is there suggest maybe diversifying where they grow pumpkins? So supply chain risk assessment, use of new technology for conservation. I think this is reducing your greenhouse gas emissions wherever possible. Invest in suppliers to ensure productivity and resilience. Consider alternative ingredients, because some of those may be coming at risk. And ensure license to operate with socio-political instability, which is happening more and more globally. Here's the challenge. Everybody eats. I think that's pretty confident that's the way it is. So I suggest that the food industry is actually well positioned to start conveying a message about climate change and getting this message through to people's stomachs, so to speak, that what we've been depending on or have taken, just accepted that we'll always have plenty of food, all the diversity we have in our food chain is actually changing, and we raise awareness that this issue is out there and actually draw attention to agriculture and its importance. There's such a disconnect now between the consumer and where their food comes from. Is this an opportunity to help bridge that gap? And whenever I give presentations, I get this question, which makes a lot of sense. So what can I do? So I'm suggesting this as something for the food industry to think about. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Questions for Mike?
I count to 4 and I'll start telling jokes if you're not careful. Yeah.
What role do you think engineering might play in helping agriculture adapt?
Just to put this in context, when I was in Washington recently, it was when there was a bill about labeling GMO products. And every place I went, that was the first question. I think they have an important role. The rate at which climate change is impacting our food supply is fast. I think we need all the tools available to keep up to that change. If that means drought-tolerant crops, whatever it might be, I think they have a significant role. Sure, there's a public concern. I took vacation recently, and wherever I went, I tried to find a package of something processed that did not have no GMOs on it. I couldn't find it. It's amazing. But I think they have a very important role across commodities where it fits. Maybe the key question is how they're implemented, because we now have some problems with Roundup Ready resistant weeds, or Roundup resistant weeds, which is a problem. But I suggest they have a major role. But let's not forget traditional breeding, which has incredible capacity as well.
Just to answer to a country that labels for GMO is Brazil. Brazil labels for GMO, and essentially, as soon as they started labeling, the space went away. Because people had a choice of whether or not they could buy it or not.
Okay. Thank you.